All right, boys and girls, let's talk about the divine relic in the room. I imagine a lot of you have already started to open up Phantom Monarchs, the latest set from Grand Archive, and one of the cards that you're looking for is Lost Providence. And if you've had good openings, you've maybe come across one. And if you're like some other people, maybe this is a card that you're struggling to find a copy of. And there's a reason for that struggle. So let's look at this card here. I've got it pulled up in Index. If you're someone who doesn't understand why this card is so relevant right now, when you first read it, it probably sounds like it's a downgrade on Grand Crusader's Ring. Just like GCR, it costs 0 and it draws you a card. But this one has setbacks, whereas Grand Crusader's Ring is quite easy to understand and see the appeal of. Now, Exalted means you need to be at a point in the game where your champion is an advanced element. Whenever you do put this onto the field, it enters hindered. But just like Grand Crusader's Ring, it draws you a card. So why are you jumping through all these hoops just to get effectively the same thing as a Grand Crusader's Ring? If we look at the text here, it says it comes in hindered, which is a negative, but you may activate this card from your material deck. If you do, it enters the field ephemeral. And then you can rest it, banish Lost Providence, draw a card. You may activate this card from your material deck is the important part here. Activating is not the same as materializing. Activating is what you do whenever you play a spell or an ally, whenever you play an action. These are types of things where you're activating a card. This means that using Lost Providence does not require you to do so during your materialization step. Let's say you go into your turn. During your materialization step, you level up your champion to level 3, and this grants you access to advanced element cards. Now that also means that you gain access to exalted cards. So you've done your materialization step, recollect, you draw for your turn, you enter your main phase. Now you can actually use Lost Providence because it says you may activate this card from your material deck. That means you don't have to materialize it. You can activate it like any other spell, an ally, an action. You can go ahead and do that during your main phase. That's what makes this card so important for decks that go to level 3, especially decks that go to level 3 who are rushing there. So this would be a deck, for an example, a deck like Arsana or a deck like Rye. These are decks that really want to get to level 3 as fast as possible, and in doing so, go really low in influence. That is why this card is so relevant. Problem with this card is that what I've just described, there's plenty of strategies that want an effect like this. This isn't something that is only for like one deck or two decks, and those decks aren't super relevant in the meta. This is going to be relevant, I think, for plenty of decks in the meta. And I'm not the only one that thinks this. And that's why we're seeing an issue with the card's availability. Why is that? Why is this card so scarce? The set just came out. You would think people are opening these, trading them, selling them. You'd be able to find it quite easily. Well, here on Index, if I go to Collector, we'll see the population of the card. And this is where I think it will start to make more sense. Is that for this initial printing of Phantom Monarchs, the first edition, and that means that URs have this full art effect, there is only 2,600 non-foil printings. That is not a lot of a card that is going to see play, and I'll maybe break this down to make this even a little bit more clear. There's 2,600 non-foils, well, there's over 20,000 people registered on Omnidex. Are all those players active? Are they playing? Are they going to want this card? Probably not. But that does give you some perspective on where we're at right now when it comes to a player base. And let's go ahead and assume that this game is not going anywhere. That player count is going to grow. And 2,600 off the initial first run print run is not a lot. Now, what this does mean is that there will be more printings of this card in the future, and whenever we get to the point of a Phantom Monarchs altered edition that gets printed, but that's not anytime soon. That's probably a year out. And I want to give a little bit more perspective because I might be sitting here telling you that 2,600 is a much smaller number than 20,000. Here's some perspective. What this means is that out of the 60,000 boxes of Phantom Monarchs that was printed, that means 1 in 21 boxes, 1 in 21 booster boxes is going to contain a lost provenance. That is incredibly hard to hit. And if you're the average player of this game, and while you do enjoy playing it with your friends and perhaps you play at locals, but you're not super competitive, you're probably only purchasing 1 or 2 booster boxes of this set. That's usually, I think, what people do whenever they're playing a game casually. 1 or 2 booster boxes. And this has an average of finding 1 in 21 booster boxes. The chances of pulling this card are incredibly low, and with numbers this low, this also means that there's not going to be a lot of these just sitting in binders waiting for you to trade for. So if you don't pull one out of a booster box, then the chances of you actually finding one available for trade is quite low. That also means that whenever you're looking for these for sale in the secondary market, it's going to be quite difficult to find as well. And I'll even show you a little bit more as to the reason why I think this card is going to be so expensive, so sought after, and quite frustrating for players. Let's look at the previous set, and we'll look at the Divine Relic for Distorted Reflections. If I look at this set, and I look at the population of this card, it is 3,500. 900 more copies of this card in non-foil out in circulation. Now, 900 more copies of a card is significant, but Distorted Reflections had a print run for first edition of 59,000 booster boxes. 59,000. That's 1,000 less than Phantom Monarchs. So there's more Phantom Monarchs out there in the world that's been printed, and there is less of the Divine Relic available. And this now becomes more of a concern because if I come over here to TCG Player, and we're now about, 5-6 months out from Distorted Reflections being printed, let's see where the Divine Relic, the Looking Glass, is at today for that set. So we're 5-6 months out. Where is this card sitting at now? There it is. You're looking at $180 for the Divine Relic from the last set. And the new one, Lost Providence, has 900 copies less printed and a set with 1,000 more booster boxes printed as well. That makes it that much more difficult to pull one of this Divine Relic compared to the last one. Again, 1 in 21 booster boxes is the average to find a Lost Providence. Now, this card is brand new, this set is brand new, so the prices that are currently on TCG Player for this Divine Relic, $160. That is quite high. I do expect this price to come down. I don't think it will stay this way for long just because of the amount of this set that's being opened up right now. I think that we're still missing some of the larger stores that typically sell Grand Archive on TCG Player, the ones that sell singles. They're not all on here yet. They're probably still building out their inventory. At least, I guess I hope so. I hope these sellers are still mass opening and selling singles. But just know that where this card is headed, assuming that this is as relevant as everyone thinks it will be, this price of $160 in the long term is probably not that bad. Because the alternative is we end up in this place where $180 for the scarcity of one Divine Relic versus the other, $180 is potentially the floor 6 months out. You're looking at maybe even more. You're maybe looking at a $200 card. And we're getting into the place of talking about $200 cards in Grand Archive. We're in a bad spot. This is still a small but successful but small trading card game that hasn't changed. It's grown. It's got a great audience. I think it's got a lot of dedicated fans. The meta is great. For people that do look at the game, they're considering playing, there's a lot to like and a lot to attract people over to want to play this game. It's not just pretty cards with no substance. The meta is great. The gameplay is great. Organized play system that Weebs of the Shore has is fantastic. How a sense function I think is so cool. There's a lot going to entice players, but if you're coming from other games, especially some of these games that have been around for a long time, and you're looking at a new game that is a new IP, it's a new company, it's been around for a few years, so you're not quite confident in its long-term trajectory, and you see that a card that you need for a meta deck is $160, $180, $200. I think a lot of people are going to get cold feet, or they're going to get priced out. I really do think that Weebs of the Shore should reconsider their approach to ultra rares, divine relics being harder to hit, regalia being harder to hit. I understand if a deck only needs one copy of a card versus potentially 4 printings of a card for a main deck card, you're in a bit of a weird spot as far as how you allocate distribution amounts for a card. That does get kind of weird. But when we're talking about divine relics, this does become quite tricky. And I think Weebs of the Shore maybe needs to reconsider their approach here as far as making these cards accessible. We're almost getting to a point here where these print runs for things like Lost Providence are so low, 2,600. You have over 20,000 people registered on Omnidex. Assuming this game continues to grow, that hits 30,000, 40,000, 50,000, and there's a card out there potentially with less than 3,000 copies of it that has a good chance of being incredibly meta relevant. You're in a hard spot. And I mentioned earlier that it's 1 in 21 booster boxes. There's a chance that that number actually isn't correct, and it's actually a little bit harder to hit these out of booster boxes. And that is because inside of every Recollection deck for the Merlin Recollection deck is 3 packs, booster packs of Phantom Monarchs. So some of these Lost Providences that we're looking for this allocation of 2,600, some of these are not even in booster boxes. They're sitting out there in Recollection decks. It makes it that much more tricky to track one of these down whenever you need to find one, you need it for your deck. If you are looking to trade for cards for the upcoming season, do be on the lookout for Lost Providence. I think it's a card that if you can find it now and you can secure one through a trade, I'd strongly recommend doing, even with the price being so high. Just go ahead and trade for it if you can. Now, buying it, you may want to wait a couple weeks. That's not great advice. If this card does tremendously well at an upcoming event, then we may see this price grow higher sooner rather than later. And it may expedite this card's relevancy and thus its price. But you may be able to wait a week or two to see if more inventory gets listed and the price comes down a little bit. Or you may just want to go ahead and just make a purchase now and go ahead and get yours. Because I don't see a world where this card doesn't have some relevancy in decks that fit within the meta moving forward. So keep that in mind. If you do have these, and maybe you have a couple extra spares that you're holding on to, that you've opened, well, first of all, congratulations on your hits. I'm glad to hear that your booster boxes or booster cases treated you well. But if you have a local scene and you want to support your local scene, those extras beyond perhaps your first or second one for your deck, maybe decks, anything beyond that, consider maybe trading those or selling those to your locals. Get those out in circulation. Don't let them just sit in binders. There's such a low population of this card that I think just making sure that your friends and people that you play with regularly have access to it as well is going to pay off for you in the long term. Well, there may be another 20, 30, 40 bucks for you to make off the card if you sit on it for a little bit. I think you'll get a much better return on investment if you simply go ahead and trade or sell that card to someone locally, and just to help support your local players so that they have the cards they need, they can continue to play, and you have somebody local to you that you can continue and enjoy the game with. So that's what I have for you today, Weebs of the Shore. I wish you the best luck in figuring this one out. It seems like quite the predicament. But I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. Thank you for checking out my video. I'm done with my booster box openings for the set. Any videos forward, I'm going to be talking about other things that are going on within the game, any kind of news, anything kind of quirky about the meta. I'll be sure to talk about it. Consider hitting that like button. Leave me a comment. Let me know what you think about this card, about its price. What do you think about the population of this card being so low as well? Maybe suggestions on what they could do to remedy this a little bit for future sets. Be curious to know your thoughts and maybe how you would approach this problem. Be nice to hear that in the comments. and consider subscribing as well. Thanks for watching. Peace.